Welcome to Social Currency, powered by Sunrise Banks, a podcast about the most innovative changemakers in finance, technology, and social impact, and how they, our guests, are dismantling barriers, reshaping their industries, and perhaps even ours too. I'm your host, Tyler Seidel.
And I'm Eric Schurr. Here, we speak to those driving positive change through social entrepreneurship. From cutting-edge technology to creative grassroots efforts, each episode seeks to reveal the stories behind the revolution that is propelling us toward a world of financial inclusivity. I'm Eric Schurr.
And I'm Maria Wilkison. Today, we're going to talk about equity and leadership and how one woman is driving change both in business and in her communities.
Kristi Hemmer joins us today. Kristi is the president and founder of the Academy for Women's Empowerment, a social enterprise that unleashes the superstar in each woman and girl by disrupting the status quo. Before starting the Academy, she spent years as an educator, counselor, and principal from pre-K to college. She is also the author of Quit Being So Good, Stories of an Unapologetic Woman. Kristi, welcome to Social Currency.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here.
I'd love to hear, Kristi, to kick us off, I'd love to hear about your journey, beginning as an educator to the moment when you decided to change course, to ultimately become a social entrepreneur, an author, and advocate. Do you want to share your story with us, please?
Sure. So I'm a teacher, counselor, principal for 20 years, and I started in Houston. I'm from Iowa, so I went to University of Northern Iowa for my early childhood elementary. Got my master's in counseling at the University of Houston, which is where Brené Brown got her master's as well. And for me, my journey from education, I was a principal of an all-girls school when I was 31, I believe it was. So, but went to international schools also. So inner city schools in Houston, charter schools in New York, international schools in Japan and in Indonesia. And for me, how it started was with a big question, which is what a lot of social entrepreneurs start with. My big question was, why do girls and women shrink in a classroom, in a boardroom, in a conversation? And I was teaching 8th grade at the time, and it was the middle school counselor as well. And for me, who's someone who's been to 76 countries by myself right now, it didn't matter if I was working with, the 3 sisters living in the garbage dumps of El Salvador and working with their daughters and working with them, or if I was working with the millionaires in Japan, we still had the same barriers for women and girls. And so that was my big question. And I started, I was a future problem solver of America when I was in junior high. And I dropped out of it because it wasn't cool, or I thought, people were saying, "Oh, if you're too smart, boys won't like you. If you're too this, it's too much." Which is what my book is about, is being more of you. And so my big question got me thinking, and that's why I learned about social entrepreneurship from Janie, who is a Brit who was living in Nicaragua and got connected with Ashoka and Youth Ventures in Minneapolis, and from there started my business.
You talk about that a little in your book about the fact that girls' confidence peaks at 9 years old.
Yes.
And they start dropping out of activities at 14. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that is so young. And then I kind of thought back to like my own life. I'm like, okay, when do I kind of remember thinking, oh, you don't look that way or you don't talk this way? And I'm like, yeah, it was probably around 9. And then, dropping of activities, I absolutely did. Like my sophomore year, I was like, yeah, not anymore. Right. So I just thought that was crazy because you don't, even living it, I didn't internalize that was what was happening until I read your book. It was very interesting.
As a teacher, that's very exciting because, teachers love when you can learn something and apply it to yourself. And then the social entrepreneur me likes, now you're going to change it. Now that you know better, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So how will you do better? Like, how will you be different by knowing that now, Maria?
I think so. In your book too, it talks about how mothers or, parents that kind of tell girls, you don't have to push that hard, or it's okay if you don't do it, or, you're fine just the way you are. And like, as a mom, I thought, oh, that's great because I'm teaching them it's okay if you win or lose or whatever it is. But then, after reading, I'm like, I kind of reflected back of, well, why can't you push people to do something? And am I pushing my son's different than my daughter? And I only have sisters, so I didn't have a brother to compare that to. But definitely, I think as a parent, realizing that it's, pushing and not giving up and ensuring that I do that the same for my daughter and watching out for it as she's getting closer to the age, right? Make sure I let her know it's not how other people see you, it's how you see you. And, when she wants to drop out of things as a sophomore, tell her it's not happening.
Yeah. Or ask why, right? What is
Yeah.
it? Is it, this? Yeah. I love that chapter of Don't Let Girls Quit. And there's so much research. And usually we come from a good place, or we think it's a good place.
Yeah.
But really it's societal, and to really explore why. So that's exciting to me that you're looking at how, what are those reasons? So again, the teacher and author in me is very excited that the learning can move on, and Moxie on there. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was very eye-opening. Did you know that, Eric? It's kind of interesting, right?
I did not. No, this is eye-opening to me. See, now my daughter wasn't that way. My daughter actually gained confidence over time. She had the appearance of being made of glass, that if somebody hit too hard, she would shatter. But what I found out is she's really made more like leather, where she can take the impacts and bounce back stronger.
Most definitely. And we all are. And oftentimes, women will ask me, like, how do I change? How do I do this? How do I become? And to me, my favorite compliment in my work is, I don't want to change who you are. I want you to be more of who you are. And then when women struggle and say, what do you think mean by that? I said, think back to when you're a little girl, whether that's 6, whether that's 8, whether that's 15. Think back to that moment, when I would watch my girls and boys as an early childhood at recess. The Moxie, the guts may look different. The girls might be on the monkey bars, the boys might be in the field, or vice versa, but the courage was there. And and you will watch it if you watch your younger, family members, or even on a playground. You can definitely see when girls turn 8 or 9. And actually, they even say now 6 is the age that girls start separating from their dream. It's called the dream gap. And Barbie's doing a lot of good work on trying to bridge that piece as well.
I can see that. Do you think, even the cartoons that my daughter watches are so different now, and some are in a good way, and some, I'm like, oh, that's not how I want you to identify as a woman and what a woman is. And it's very interesting, because it's not like you don't sit down and watch shows with your children anymore. That's just not, I grew up, there was one TV, you're all watching what you're watching. Yeah. Now everybody's got a different screen and a different opportunity to watch whatever they want to watch. And I think it's important as a parent to try to make sure you always at least understand what they're watching.
Even and also understand the storylines. Like I used to teach Cinderella, and I was looked at different points of view. I love busting echo chambers. So I do a Cinderella from Russia, or Cinderella from Egypt, or Cinderella from China, but they all have the same messages. There's nothing Cinderella does in any of those stories that shape her destiny. It's all done to her or for her. Even the mouse, and even Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, has more control over Cinderella's life, and a man, of course, as we learn, and her stepsisters, than she does. There's nothing she does in that entire story that gives her agency. And that's what we're continuing to teach. Women and girls should have things done to them or for them.
So in your book, you talk about take up space, be first, and find helpers. And throughout the book, it just kind of brings back how those 3 things are how models you've used to kind of navigate through life. And I'd love everybody to hear more about that here.
What part would you love to hear more about? Because I can go on and on and on,
what the 3 are, why they're important, and how we can all kind of adopt them.
Yeah. To me, it was more about how to be unapologetic. Everyone keeps asking me, like, how do you take up space, and how you're different? Of course, like when I stand on stage and there's 1,000 people on the stage and they're like, how do you do this? I'm like, oh, I come up there every day and like I'm fearful or this or that, but for me, the 3 steps what came down to, and because I'm a coach and an educator and a world traveler, it was the 3 things to me was, number 1, take up space. That came from my first question is, why do women and girls shrink? So that came from my big question. And it was like, how do I take up space, and where do I need to take up more space? Physically, even sometimes physically in line, right? I love, like, if someone's getting too close to me, I'm like, oh, and I'll just, spread my legs a little bit, and people will move, as well as airspace. Having space to speak, leadership space, having a spot at the table, having visibility, whatever take up space means for you. And then the second one is be first. And this one is really about like, where do you need to be what she can see? And, we know the research shows that when we can see what others do, we can be it. But my question is, where do you need to be where she can see? And for me, it's, really being that social entrepreneur. And I'm sure both of you have had experiences where people are watching you and you have no idea. And there's something you say or do that changes their lives. And so that be first, be the first to publish a book or be the first to speak up. Right. And then along with that one, I do also share be a first follower. So, when you're Kristi Hemmer and your Academy for Women's Empowerment and you're at a family reunion, everyone expects me when something unkind to be said, they all look at me to expect for Kristi Hemmer to say, well, that's unkind or that's sexist or that's racist. And they're like, there goes Kristi Hemmer again. But when my mom, who does not like to go first, when Linda Hemmer says, I agree with Kristi as the first follower, then the family reassesses what's happening. So there's a lot of power in being the first follower too. And not only just the first follower of a person, but of a group. We don't have to keep reinventing. We know as social entrepreneurs, we don't need to keep reinventing. Get behind someone else. I always hear women I talk about like when I speak up and I have guts in a meeting or wherever I was in the world, even traveling. And then you have like 3 or 4 people who come running up to you afterwards and go, yeah, that's what I thought too. That's what I thought. I'm like,
Yeah.
That means nothing to me right now. Like if you needed to say that when I was in that moment, because the outcome would be very different if you had said what you're saying to me right now in the space wherever I said it. And so to me, that idea of being a first follower is very important too. And then the third one, the look for the helpers, and that came from Mr. Rogers. And that's so even in times like now, when he says when bad things happen and, look for the helpers, there's always people helping. And like, even like in our current, situation and stuff too, I'm always like, okay, what does Gloria Steinem do? What does Maya Angelou do? This history, continues on. I was a humanities teacher and it says those who don't know history can, repeat itself. Well, we repeat history a lot through our lives. And so to me, I look for those helpers, whether they're in past, like role models or people around me or other places. So that's and I say look for the helpers because as women, we know how to be helpers. I'm not saying don't be a helper. I'm saying we need help. We need practice on looking for the helpers. And, that to me is an important piece because it's like my students, they'd say when they didn't do well on a test, I'm like, well, what did you study? Well, they studied the things they knew because it made them feel good. They didn't study the things they didn't know. And that's why they had the same results. So for me, it's getting women and, girls to look for the helpers, which to me means also knowing you need help, knowing who to ask, asking for the help. And this is what I'm still working on, accepting the help. I can know usually a lot of those different steps. I'm still working on then accepting the help. Like, I might be inconveniencing her or him. Oh, what if, this or that. And so for me, it's about my part of that is accepting the help now.
Kristi, you bring up a great point, especially at the end. I have found that most days I can be useful by helping others. There are days, though, that my role is to allow the grace to be helped by others.
Yeah.
And as long as I remember that, I can accept that help with a little more grace and certainly with a lot of gratitude.
Yeah.
I really have to pause for a minute and make sure that I am truly listening. And I'll use perfect example as my wife. She has such wisdom, and if I just listen to it more than half the time, I would be much more successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I challenge myself all the time to she is saying something that is important to me, and I need to consider it with the same respect as I would with somebody who has deep experience in an issue. And I have to be honest. Her exposure not being in the business world she's one of my most valuable business partners because she has that perspective of being herself.
Well, and you're busting an echo chamber, right? She's not in the business world. So that way, to me, like my sweet spot is being the educator, being a social entrepreneur, being an author, and traveling to 76 countries by myself. Like my sweet spot is all those intersections. And it reminds me of Raygun has this, it's a social business as well in Des Moines, Raygun. And they have a t-shirt that came out that Tim Walls, I guess, said, surround yourself with smart women and then listen to them. And there's a t-shirt that they created. So it reminds me of what you said, Eric. So in that way.
So speaking of that, I think in your book too, you kind of allude to like feminism is not for women. Feminism is for everybody. And I think that is something that people don't think, like feminism has such a stigma to the name, right?
It does.
And
it does. And as a language person, it's so important that we change the words if we need to then.
Right. So, you say, when people ask me, oh, who are you interviewing? And it's like, Kristi Hemmer, like, what does she do? What's she about? And it's like, you're trying to be quick and you're like, well, she's this like strong feminist. And they're like, what is that? What me? And I'm like, well, I said it in one word to just keep walking. You know what I mean? Not to like keep a conversation. But, what I've told them is like, feminist isn't really about being for women, although you are. It's really for mankind. Like it's about not
If you look at feminism, it
person.
means believing there's equal rights for women and men.
Yeah.
That is the definition.
And in all the ways that betters all of us, right? To Eric's point, like it betters, everybody can be a little more compassionate and listen a little more to somebody else.
Well, and then men don't have to work as hard because there's a lot of pressure on men, to perform and to provide the financials. And when women have that capacity, which we do now, it's 50 years ago, we didn't as much. To have that capacity, then they have more space in their life. They can have more space in their life too. And so I know, as sometimes when I get hired, they're like, wait, you're Academy for Men's Empowerment. Do you know how to work with men? And I'm like, I'm a teacher. I love my girls and I love my boys. And I'm like, and I'm a systems person. So, bringing in, I know Eric, you mentioned about how it takes a lot of courage to do the work where, when women to speak up, it does. But in some ways, I would say it's just as brave for men to speak up. To be that first follower, because it carries so much power and it gives so much space for other men to say, I believe that too. I believe that too. And again, I would not be in business if there was not really change makers, women and men who believe in the wellness and the equality and equity in the world.
Can you talk a little bit about the characteristics that you see from organizations that hire you? Like, what are the common elements of organizations that bring you on? And what's the type of work they're asking you to perform?
Yeah. So, it changed. Obviously, my business has been around since, HR used to hire me before Me Too. When Me Too happened, then it was DEI. And now with working across the country, DEI is not probably the ones that's going to be hiring me as much. I would say that the companies that hire me definitely have courage. They definitely have a leadership that is, not afraid of being wrong. I think, I just applied for a TED Talk to apply. And one of the things I said about traveling is one of the things I learned was the joy of being wrong. So I think, corporations that hire me or universities that hire me, there's one that I just interviewed this morning, and one of their values was courage. And one of their other values was care. And I'm like, that's me, I will be as brave and I will, have as much moxie, and I have the care part as well. And so I think that helps to bust down the fear, to build that trust, to build that connection. So I'd say the corporations that hire me, and, they have to have guts, and they have to deeply care. And the most popular session I'm doing right now is the one I have on the difference between sponsorship and mentorship, which is, I call it the power of sponsorship, bringing others along in your success. Because I feel like that statement, all of us can lean into. And if we can't lean into it, then we're really, that company probably doesn't want to keep us anyway. So that's that session that I do. And that one's a really popular one and really trending. So it just depends, I'm a teacher, so I have like 15 different sessions, but my newest one also is the power of change. So that's how I pivoted, right? So that I can be more where people feel like, oh yeah, Kristi can work with us as women and men. I created a session on the power of change, and I'm very excited for that one. I have a couple companies already looking at that one. I just released that one, and that came from being a social entrepreneur. When you have, your business be on the chopping block. I mean, legally, my business is Inc., AWEINC. So if things start getting scrubbed for women, the word women, and my business will still be here because federally I'm an Inc. And so for me, pivoting is always, turning those challenges into opportunities. It goes back to when I was a little girl and I was in the Future Problem Solvers of America, right? Still a future problem solver of America, actually future problem solver of the world. So I think those are the kinds of companies and universities and organizations that reach out to me.
Are you still
We'll
doing
continue. Actually, I've actually found more support right now. Like some people will like, hey, can we give you a deposit for our session in September? Because in the back of their head, they're thinking, I might not have this money then. And so it's been really interesting. I just read this quote that I love. It's my new favorite quote. And it says, wherever women gather together, failure is impossible. And it's Susan B. Anthony. And I didn't say it correctly, but the essence I think you capture. And that's what I've been doing, is gathering small groups of women and change maker men as well. And so I think it's those change makers, again, that hire me. And then they'll always be there. And that's what I tell myself when I have fear that sometimes comes in, or doubt, or you see something on the news or hear something, or you lose a contract because of the work I do. And of course, that's been happening since affirmative action got overturned in 2023. I've lost contracts consistently since then. So for me, it's that idea of change makers will always be there. Look for the helpers.
Do you still do quite a bit internationally?
I do when I travel. Yep, I do. And then that's the other factor I'd say right now, is those companies that are hugely international, they're not afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I had a session 2 weeks ago. I did a power sponsorship. We had 924 virtually tune in, and we did 14 watch parties. And so that was probably one of the biggest audiences for a virtual session to have, and huge, big international company. So I think that's the other factor going forward for me. My strategic mind, my business mind, my advisory team's mind is like, go for those international companies that aren't going to be impacted as much from the day-to-day chaos in the United States.
I think there's a part in your book, and I don't have it with me, where you talk about like incorporating some of the more feminine characteristics in your management, and how that really can create like a community within your business, and it helps retention go up by like 50%, and engagement, and just people's like workplace happiness and efficiencies.
Yeah, all the statistics show when women lead, all the health indicators of a business go up. Retention, innovation, engagement, collaboration, recruitment, financial, when women lead. And so it's an investment for our businesses to have more women in leadership. And then to me, leadership not only means leadership, it means decision-making power, because there's some women I work with who technically have a role of a leader, but then when we're going along and negotiating, they're like, oh, I have to go check with this person. And so they don't have the decision-making power, which I talk a little bit about in my book, about the difference between responsibility and decision-making power. Because women always are like, oh, I'll take that on, or they're expected to. And I'm like, great. And again, the power of and, what decision-making power, or what are you going to get out of it? What win are you going to get out of it as well? So that piece of it too. But yes, actually the UN says when you invest $1 in a woman, 90% or 90 plus cents of that dollar goes back to her community, compared to 33 cents for men. So when you invest $1 in a woman, and I was in a C-suite, it was all C-suite, and they're like, what do you mean? How is this true? And the one brave woman in the C-suite spoke up and said, yes, when I get money, I spend it on my son's tutoring, his soccer. And then they're like, well, what does your husband spend it on? And she's like, golf, happy hours, that kind of thing. But golf especially. So to me, the numbers are there.
Yeah, I think you also say, like, in America, 85% of financial decisions in households are made by women, which is totally true in my house. Like if I disappeared, I think most of our bills would go unpaid. Not because he couldn't, but he just like, there's a login for this, or like my children's lunch would never happen.
Exactly. Well, and the cool thing too about that, because, this is not cool, but pay equity is going to be 300 years, right? And actually the company I just worked with this morning, their goal is not even pay equity, it's wealth equity. And I thought, equality. I'm like, oh, interesting. Because we talk about wealth being like long-term, right? So now I'm like, the learner me is like, okay, how do I incorporate this? But my partner is the one that pays all the bills. He manages all that, partly because I'm out of the country all the time. So I'm like, I don't know, can I get into this? Can I do that? But I choose where we spend our money. When I take our nieces out for dinner, I go to the women-owned restaurants. When I buy gifts, I shop at Athleta because it's a B Corp. I shop at, a local, when I buy my stuff, like Lip Esteem, Wise Inc. with, being women-owned. So I make their choices, even though they're his nieces, technically, they're mine now, too. I make all the decisions of where we go. Except for maybe his birthday and his car. I don't make any decisions on that. I wouldn't spend that kind of money on a car. However, he does, and it's great for him because that's his office. He's in his car all the time. That's his office. So
how can people find you or the Academy of Women's Empowerment if they are like, hey, we really would love to find out more about how you work with the businesses or work with schools or all the work you're doing?
Well, I really appreciate that question. That comes from sponsorship. So thank you. Thank you for that trust and for that risk to put that out there. KristiHemmer.com is where you can find me. And that's where it's the best place where you can see some of my workshops. I am redoing my website. It's been in a process. I rebranded this summer. But all the content's there. And LinkedIn is probably the next best place to find me. I'm a Gen Xer. I travel a lot. So Facebook and Instagram, I'm not as active in, and I'm not going to apologize for that because I'm unapologetic, right? But if you want to find me, LinkedIn and my website are the two best spots to find me and to connect. And of course, I always love to, sponsor back too.
Great. Is there anything else you want to make sure we hit on before we go?
I would say that I think my favorite compliment of my work, and this is what I would say to you all, is not to change who you are. And society always wants us to change and conform, but to be more of who you are. As an early childhood educator who did a lot of recess duty, my girls and my boys were out there playing and they had the same level of moxie. They had the same level of courage. And to go back to not changing, not shrinking, but being more of who you are, taking up more of space who you are, especially those change makers out there. Absolutely. And then I guess last would be, look for those helpers, look for the history, look for those people we are here. And as I'm doing more digging and finding more small groups, I go back to Margaret Mead's that never doubt the power of a small group is the only thing that ever has changed history or changed things is that small group. So those are the two things I would like to say. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, it's been awesome talking to you. Thank you for joining us today on Social Currency.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. Moxie on.
Thank you.
And that engaging dialogue was powered by Sunrise Banks, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Thanks for listening to the Social Currency Podcast by Sunrise Banks.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, click like and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast content.
We'll see you soon.